Oh, you'll have liftoff.
Yeah, I think so. Share screen, hopefully. Okay, shall we get cracking? Okay, I'm going to be talking about the regime change that took place very recently in Pakistan. Now, we may ask what that brought the regime change about. And the answer to that is what we are going to be seeking in this talk today. Now, Imran Khan, as you know, has been there for the past 3.5 years to nearly 4 years now in Pakistan, after 26 years of effort in wanting to, come into power. Now, he set up a party 26 years ago. I was at that time also at Karachi, called the Justice Party. Now, if you know anything about Pakistan, the thing that stands out is really one of those real problems that all poor countries, third world countries have, which is corruption. And Pakistan is one of those countries which had, in a mega scale, industrial scale. And the two families that were governing Pakistan, the Sharif's family and the Zardari, which is the Bhutto family, they have been in power on and off for the past 30 years. Interspersed with the military rule once, I think, by Musharraf. So what we are seeing is a country that has really gone through a type of governance which has really corrupted all the institutions. Because if you have corrupt family who then took control over the country, they control their looting, if you like, through placement of their own people in the various institutions which constitute the checks and balance in a democracy. So what we have is a corrupted society, corrupted institutions, and corrupted governance. And on top of all this, of course, it's a nuclear power. And in that environment, the only hope that Pakistan had in surviving was the army. Army was the one that kept the integrity of the country, kept all the outside enemies off its territories up to a point. So that was the, in fact, feature that saved Pakistan till Imran Khan came in. Now, when Imran Khan came in, he started to talk a different language. He says, my party is a justice party. I want accountability. And I want to have an independent foreign policy. Now, that wasn't heard of. Because being next to Afghanistan, Pakistan has been so, essential for USA that it got Pakistan into the war. And what that meant, of course, was that Pakistan was fighting the US war along with the US troops in Afghanistan as well for 20 years with no solution. Of course, Imran Khan was the only one who said, we don't want a war. We want to sort of sit down and discuss and resolve the issues. That sort of fell out deaf ears, so it didn't get anywhere. So what we ended up by having was the destruction of Afghan society. And of course, we've seen this sort of thing before in Afghanistan, in Libya, Syria, and Yemen, wherever. So Pakistan became one of those victims, which was fighting the war on behalf of USA, but at the same time, had a lot of its own people killed, 80,000 of them, and a lot of destruction as far as the economy went. So in those circumstances, when Imran Khan came in and started to say, no, we don't want to fight anybody else's wars. We want to be able to sort of have our own independent policy, that went down like a lead balloon. Especially when he came out and said on the air, CNN interviewed him, and said, will you be able to give bases to USA after the pullout in Afghanistan? He said, absolutely not. Now, that, of course, really riled a lot of people out there in the US State Department and Defense Department. So we ended up by having a type of voice emerging in Pakistan, which said, we want accountability, we want an independent policy, and that didn't go down too well. And finally, the trigger for his loss of power, which took place about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, was when his visit to to Russia took place. This was pre-planned, I mean, in the sense that he would visit. There was no thought of war, anything like that in Ukraine. But he landed on the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And of course, he said, look, we want to be neutral. We hope the resolution can be done through discussion and so on and so forth. But again, what USA wanted Pakistan to do was, no, you have to come out against Russia completely and clearly and say you're against it and so on and so forth. Whereas India, who's also a friend of USA, said, no, we want to be neutral on this matter as well. We want a resolution that is going to be resolved on the table, not on the fields then. But in the case of Pakistan, when they said the same thing, that was not accepted. So that became the trigger. And what happened? Now, we're going to be talking about it. Let's go and see what the agenda for today is. So the agenda today is the toppling of a legitimate government of Imran Khan about 3 months ago. He was brought in by democratic means, elected, although a weak leader in terms of the actual amount of votes he had, yet he managed to sort of steer the country in such a way that it became a viable country, not facing default, not facing all sorts of terrible issues. So that toppling is something that we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail. So what happened there is at midnight, the drama took place, and I'll talk more about that. And then conspirators, we'll talk about who the conspirators are, both international and domestic. And why was the change necessary at this point in time? And I just briefly, mentioned that a little while ago. And then, of course, when we look back on it now, even 3 months later, and the governance that has been replaced with government at the moment are the worst type of government that one can imagine. They are all the absconders, the people with court cases against them, murderers, mafia, in fact, but all brought together. And we'll talk about who brought them together. And then, of course, we'll talk about what's next for Pakistan. And yesterday was a very crucial day for Imran Khan, because a certain type of election took place, and I'll tell you the result later on. Okay, why are we talking about Pakistan? Well, Pakistan is one of those countries which is very strategically located. If you look at its position, it's, it's a sort of conduit to Central Asia.
I would listen.
It sort of is next to the oil routes, close to Africa, the Suez and all that. And of course, it has a type of terrain which is, varied, 22 types of climates there are. So second largest Muslim country in the world, only nuclear Muslim power, a geostrategic location, and 45th on the GDP scale, and on the 25th on the parity PPP sort of yardstick, and a defense budget of about 7 billion, and has a role in international politics. You're usually a yes person, yes country to whatever the US says. So no independence at all. And in return for that, subjugation, if you like, USA turned a blind eye to the looting that was taking place. So what happened on the midnight? I'm just going to move this a bit. Okay. Now, he had a majority in parliament of about 20 people or thereabouts. And what the conspirators did was to try and buy these people and got all the opposition together and say, bring in a vote of confidence, and then we will have him removed as prime minister. That was the plan. And that was what happened on the midnight on the April. So a no confidence motion was raised in Parliament. And the surprising thing about this was there was no discussion about no confidence motion at all before that, but it was secretly being planned by the conspirators. And who were complicit in this? The army, who's the real power, which is very surprising. The courts, even more surprising. All the opposition parties and the renegade MPs. They all came together. And then when the motion was put into Parliament, the Speaker was so terrified of this, he resigned because he had a threat, a call from the unknown numbers. So the Deputy Speaker had to sit in place, and he then threw out this motion of no confidence, saying, I'm not going to accept this because it is the conspirators' plot. And they had documentary evidence of this plot. And we'll talk about that as we go along. So when he rejected that, the court, Supreme Court, opened its door at midnight and waited for the motion to be passed or rejected. Of course, they knew it was going to be passed. And they had police fines outside waiting in case they said, no, we're not going to hold this motion. And of course, they were forced to have that motion. And that motion, of course, passed, and Imran Khan was removed. That was the way that it happened. And of course, some of the things that are mentioned here as well, MPs who voted, who were in Imran Khan's party, they were the renegade ones, they were bought for $1 million each. Because some of the people who rejected came out with the evidence saying, yeah, we've been offered $1 million to vote against you. And of course, with all this thing was presented to the Supreme Court after having been vetted by the National Security Committee, which is the highest body in the land, because which has all the defense chiefs and everybody in there. And that the Supreme Court chose not to look at because they were complicit. So they said, no, we don't look at that. We just want to make sure that the ruling that we have given of holding the no confidence is passed, or put to the test. So there you are. So complicity from an outside power, USA, in league with the army, the courts, the opposition party, and other institutions who also collaborated. So everybody was against it, which was astonishing, especially after a period when Pakistan was showing signs of recovery, of making good progress, and so on. I'll show you as we go along. Now, the conspirators, what is the evidence? The letter was revealed of the US Under Secretary of State, Donald Lu, who's in charge of Southeast Asia and so on, threatening the Pakistani ambassador. And this was recorded by his own sort of secretary and the ambassador secretary who wrote down the minutes. And wherein he said, this forthcoming confidence motion, if you don't pass it, Pakistan is going to be punished. If it is not passed, then of course, if it's not passed, Pakistan will be punished, but if it's passed, then everything will be forgiven. So this was evidence that Imran Khan, in fact, way before the crowds, before the Security Committee, the courts, even the president, And the president, in fact, wrote a letter, sent this evidence to the Supreme Court, who still chose to ignore it. Now, Not surprising, the legal or the courts in Pakistan have a standing of 140 in world standing. Amongst the 100, whatever countries there are, their ranking is 130. And why is that so? Because in the past 30 years, these two corrupt families, the Azari family and the Sharif family, they've been nominating their own judges. And of course, as they moved up the scale, the Supreme Court and so on. But there were a few who were bold enough to take independent action. And I will mention that later. And on the domestic side, who were the ones? The conspirators. All the opposition parties, there are 14 of them, from religious parties to socialist parties to the two big corrupt ones. And then, of course, all the other institutions were also, and the renegade, like the Imran Khan's own MPs, who all of a sudden said, okay, we're going to side with the opposition. Because what had happened was that the US embassies quoted these MPs and the records of these MPs going into the US embassy and so on, which is very uncommon because embassies deal with the bureaucrats in the foreign office, not with the individual MPs. So here was a clear indication of a conspiracy being built up. So there you have the country's mafia was there as well, the business interests. Now we'll talk about the mafia a little bit later. So what were the conspirators promised? They were promised total relief because they had so many cases against them of having done money laundering to the scale of billions. And this we'll talk about as we go along. Okay, from the geopolitics, what are the things that we need to sort of be concerned about? Imran Khan was saying free independent policy. In fact, he had gone to Russia to buy oil, which was going to be given to him at 30% discount, which was going to mean a lot to Pakistan, because India was also being sold at that price, although India is a friend of USA. But when Pakistan tried to bring that about, they said, no, you can't do it. So you can see the double standard which has been applied by USA. And USA has not done this just with Pakistan. I'll show you all the other countries that they have done so. The other factor as well, apart from foreign policy, is that China and Pakistan were getting close. Now, I've talked about the China corridor, the Belt and Road Initiative in my previous talk, where a huge infrastructure is being created to connect Asia with Africa and Europe. And billions of dollars being spent on that. Because China's foreign policy is not one of saying, I'm going to have a base next to your country and I'm going to make sure that what you do conforms to our sort of way of doing business or whatever. They said, no, we want to move away from the political angle. We want to just bring about the economic well-being of the countries that we are going to be dealing with. So whatever your system of governance is, if you want to be able to have an infrastructure in your country to develop your economy, we'll come and help you with that. So that policy was what Pakistan was also pursuing and was quite successful. They had a lot of things until lately. Well, a few people of the Chinese origin, they got killed because of all the collusion and collaboration that was going on. So they have become a bit quiet until, of course, we'll see in the future. And then Pakistan and Russia are drawing closer to the oil and gas and the wheat deal that Imran Khan went in to do, which was about 3 months ago, or when the Ukraine war started. On the very day that he landed, Putin sort of walked in. Now, the other thing that Imran Khan also did was that he was, because he had been educated well, because the previous leaders, they had no education whatsoever. They came up with false degrees and papers to certify that they were qualified. But Imran Khan is one of those people who actually went to Oxford over here and got himself a degree in PPP, I think it was. And then, of course, took up cricket and so on. He was not interested in politics before, until about 26 years ago. So he then saw that there was absolute lack of leadership in the Muslim world, except that Saudi Arabia was the top dog in the Muslim world. Why? Because it had pots of money from the oil. And they used to give, farm out a little bit of money here, there, and there to keep all the Muslim countries, quiet. So they would not have any voice in anything in world affairs. Have you heard of OIC? I'm sure you haven't. It's the Organization of Islamic Countries. It's made up of 50 countries, which meets regularly, but nobody hears about it because they don't say anything which matters. And that's because Saudi Arabia said, we don't want to hear any voices. And that is listening to the masters in USA. So then after the pullout of USA from Afghanistan, which was a real debacle, and a waste of 20 years of resources of both the countries, USA and Afghanistan, and not making any headway. So you can see the Vietnam, the Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Iraq, and a foreign policy which has become a total laughing stock of the whole world. But yet nobody says anything about it because Big Brother says, no, you can't. You listen to us. The threat being not the old, British Empire days of gunboat diplomacy, but rather sanctions. So nobody wants, even a country like Germany keeps quiet when it needed so much gas and built 2 pipelines. Keeping quiet because they said sanctions will come our way and we can't afford to have. Only Angela Merkel was the one who had sufficient cojones, as they say, to be able to stand up to them, to the USA. But the current one is weak and can't do it. So the leadership of the Muslim world was gravitating toward Imran Khan. And he had the ability to speak. And he was able to speak. And he did at the UN, the General Assembly, he talked about 4 things, which went down, some like lead balloons. One was about Islamophobia, the cartoon stuff and all that in the name of democracy. But, it's not the sort of thing that one does deliberately to try and rile up, inciting violence. Anyway, he's talked about it. And recently, in March, the Secretary General came to Pakistan and said, okay, we are going to have a World Day, which is Anti-Islamic Day, 14th of March. So that went, exploded in Muslim countries like, good sort of breath of fresh air, finally. So they said, finally, somebody is speaking at the national level regarding Islamophobia. And of course, he also talked about dirty money, money laundering. Now, you might have heard that I've given one of these talks earlier on about how, rather sort of, interestingly, the tax shelters that have been created, maybe with some little good intention, initially, but they have become the way that money gets siphoned from the poor countries into these tax shelters, and taxes are not paid. And that becomes a vehicle for looting the poor country. And of course, he talked about the climate as well at that time, and Kashmir, perennial issue. So these were the big issues that, were there for against Imran Khan. Now, this is a picture, just a little, about the United States actually being complicit in making regime changes all over the world. You can see the dots all over the world. So USA has not been just quiet. And a detailed thing is all these countries, to the extent of interference in those affairs. And that makes sense in a way because in order to maintain that control of these subjugated countries, 800 bases are there all over the world. 800 bases. So when we talk about USA, okay, the public, or half my family is over there, my siblings and so on. Well, I love the American people, but the government, especially the government that you don't know about, the government that does all the covert operations, they are the people who have destroyed half the world, all in the name of democracy. These are just slogans. And those people who swallow all that, I mean, is up to them. Now, in the case of Pakistan, where did they go wrong? I mean, I'm saying wrong because they found somebody who's going to fight back. According to Imran Khan, the repeated sort of statements, he says, I played the game till the last ball. So he's got that resilience and mental sort of, strength to be able to pursue that, even in the face, in the face of, extraordinary, he's being able to do that. And how is he doing it? We'll talk about it. Now, what he did immediately when he got removed as prime minister 3 months ago, he started to embark on all across the country, in every big city, holding huge rallies, telling them this is what's happened. We've got a corrupt government. This is a conspiracy that has happened from abroad. They don't want us to be free to make our own sort of choices. And that message was really sort of taken up because he said, you're not slaves. You were slaves once under the British Empire, according to his narrative. But when you got the freedom, you became the slaves of the USA. Now we want the real sort of freedom. And that freedom says, I want to be able to make my own foreign policy. If I want to buy wheat from Russia, I should be able to buy it. I'm not going to fight a war of Afghanistan using my people. Because what is the USA doing right now at the moment? They're saying, we will fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. Of course, because there are no soldiers of USA fighting this US war. So USA has done this type of thing in Iraq, in Iran, all over the world, except in Vietnam, lost a lot. From there, it learned a lesson, far better to get the local people to fight their war than to send your own soldiers. So you see, there are some little good things do happen. So what happens now is that now these conspirators are now finding they can't manage the economy. So much so that the rupee has gone down from 170 or 180 to 220 at 10. Lost about 80, 70 rupees, 80 rupees, from 70, about 50 rupees nearly in the 3 months. And the moment you lose the value, the rupee gets devalued, then the debt increases because that's denominated in dollars. So huge repayments have got to be there. And they can't. They don't have a tax base, which Imran Khan, in fact, has done. When he came in the 3 years that he was there, he increased the tax collection enormously, increased the productivity, which was the highest in the 70 years of Pakistan history over there, to 6%. The crops had the biggest output because payments were made early and given to the farmers. And then his handling of COVID was extraordinary because Pakistan is one of the 3 or 4 countries that was mentioned by the UN as having dealt with the COVID in the best possible way, without losing the economy and without losing too many lives. So he has done everything right practically. And yet, because of the way that he has asked for more and more sort of recognition in world affairs, that was not suited. And I think this was the big miscalculation. And I think they're going to have to backtrack. And that election that took place yesterday was for the 20 renegade MPs that were unseated because they had left the party. And by all calculation, it was going to be an election which was going to be the turning point for Pakistan. It was either going to sort of go down the old ways or the new ways. And you had in that situation, the whole state, the army, the courts, the government machinery, the police, they did all the open rigging of the election. But Imran Khan, because of his attraction to the public and public having bought the narrative, he told them, he said, be at the ballot box, make sure you safeguard that no mischief making is going to be taking place and so on. And I'll tell you the results later. Now, this is the growth that he sort of had in the last year that he was there in government. Immense amount of, good to the country. He's ranked as one of the top countries who did the COVID thing remarkably well. Now you can see the amount of, at every rally of his, you could say the more than 50 to 100,000, 500,000 people, as far as the eye can see. And people flocked to his rallies. And there were rallies practically every day in different parts of the country. Now, what is he giving at these rallies, the message? One is talking openly about how USA has conspired to oust him and how the local conspirators have joined to help USA. And he says now they've put somebody who's totally incompetent, and they are thieves because 60% of the cabinet are out on bail. They've got cases, and the prime minister was due to be sentenced when he was put in place. So you can see the blatant abuse of power being used by this mafia, all in the name of get rid of somebody who's doing good to the country and would have done good to the whole world, in fact, because he was interested in bettering the life of people, not just bettering the life of the arms dealers or the industrial complex. So the message he made it quite open. So the public started to understand. So they got educated and say, yeah, well, this is what's happening. 30 years with no progress because these people have been looting our wealth and taking it abroad. In fact, this Nawaz Sharif, yeah, I'll come to that as we go. How we're doing. Yeah. Okay, real drama of politics. So what's happening at the moment? The governance of this corrupt government. Sure.
No, not very well. No, I can't hear very well. That's fair. I would rather external. I don't know if that's what turn up, but if that's okay with you.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's too noisy.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead. No problem.
If anybody gets off, we can turn it on. Only if it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay, fine. If anybody feels hot, just come nearer to this fan. Yeah. Now, this corrupt government that has come in, the Home Minister has been chosen because he's got 22 murder charges on him. And if you look at him, not only accept 22, but I think he's killed 100 people. In Nicosia, I sort of attended one of these villages, on a holiday. And they had these pictures of bandits in that museum in the old days. And I said, what was the way of justice in those days? It was very simple. If you look like a bandit, you are a bandit. And they shot them. And he fits that image very clearly. He looks like a bandit. Unfortunately, the Corsican law doesn't apply here. So he's in power at the moment. Now, they've got the government of Imran Khan, before he got ousted, had another year and a half to go. So they are going to be waiting, they said, until a year and a half, until they have removed all evidence, of their wrongdoing in the country. Burning, building, or usually what used to happen in Pakistan was, if there was some office somewhere, with all your records, it would get burnt. And that was the end of it. But this time, I think some smart Supreme Court judge says, when this government came in, please bring us all the cases of these people and give it under control of the Supreme Court, which is one wise thing they have done. Because otherwise, even that would have been destroyed. So what we have now is a corrupt government in place, Imran Khan on the loose with having all the support of the people. And now it's a matter of seeing what the results on yesterday's election are going to give. Now, these are the Panama Papers. You might have heard of Panama Papers. This was the tax shelter in Panama that had all the wealth of people with no names. You know, this is all the expertise, by the way, lies in the city of London over here. And they're the people who sort of funnel this money into those places. And what we find is that these people have kept money in these shelters. And not only that, those companies that were identified as big bears, there was a big Panama sort of leak. They've got properties here. I think the Sharifs have got 64 properties here. In Mayfair, they live there in Mayfair. So, I mean, there's no end to the corruption. This is the Panama Papers. This is the Sharif and the daughter there and two sons. One of the sons went to college in LSE with my daughter. He says he was a real nut. So he still remains a real nut. Now, this is a Zardari. I met this guy when I was in Pakistan. He wasn't that powerful. He comes from a pretty humble background. His father was, a film theater owner, and he used to sell tickets on the pavement. And now he owns a Portman Hotel in the Churchill Square there, Churchill Hotel, Portman Square. 34 sugar mills, 1,000 acres of arable sugarcane land, and on and on and on. And so you can see the amount of disgusting greed. Can't imagine that anybody would want so much, especially when you see a country like Pakistan with so many poor people. Now, this is the crowds that you can see that Imran Khan has attracted. I mean, it's huge numbers. You can see a larger picture of one of them. This is just the last few days before the election. And he did 2 or 3 meetings, such meetings, in order to try and convince the people of that locality who had sent in these renegade MPs to now vote for his MPs, who would sort of be honest enough not to be sold out. And these people are the ones who voted yesterday. That's me protesting as well here in Hyde Park, not so long ago. Yeah. Now, this is Imran Khan raising climate issue, the Kashmir issue, Islamophobia, and money laundering. Now, at least one success there, which is the UN having declared 40th of August as Anti-Islamophobia Day. No, of course. And of course, on the climate front, he's done something as well, I'll tell you. And Kashmir, nothing is happening, because nobody wants to sort of challenge India. And money laundering, nobody can find out where the money is. So the legislation here even is very weak. So all the oligarchs from Russia come in and put their money here. And difficult to get hold of the money. The only thing you can catch is their yacht or their mansion or something, but not wealth, because the laws are such that you can't. Now, as far as climate is concerned, Imran Khan has planted 1 billion trees in the northern area where he was in power in the province. Now that he was prime minister, he says, I want to plant 10 billion. So he sort of has done a lot on that front. Also, since the days of partition, India has built 3,000 dams. When the waters of the Himalayas come down, the rivers are the ones that deliver water to the land. Now, if you don't stop that water through dams and manage it, then of course it flows into the sea. India has built 3,000. Pakistan has done hardly 10. But anyway, he has initiated a building program of 10 more since he came. That's Islamophobia. This is the relationship with China. You can see this Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. I've talked about it many times. And you can see, crucially here, Pakistan is very much next to China here, and will provide access for China to take the oil from here and go into the western region of Xinjiang. Otherwise, it takes a long time to go there. And that route saves them enormous amount of time. It takes 40 days otherwise. The other way, this way, it takes 7 days. So they save a lot of money as well. And of course, they provide access to Africa for China. And then all of Central Asia here then gets an outlet into the Arabian Sea, along with Russia. This is the game, the big game that used to play in the colonial days. Russia to be contained and not given access to the warm waters of the Arabian Sea. But you can see China is way ahead in terms of trying to bring about infrastructure to all the poorer countries of the world there. Now, what are the domestic programs has he initiated? He's initiated poverty alleviation program, LGBT community, there are lots of people who have gender issues. He's supported that. Then all the women, poor women, he's brought in a program to sort of help them to have a little job and some loans. And then he's got this youth program giving them training and loans as well to start businesses. Housing scheme brought in these mortgage type of schemes and helped them on that front. And the biggest one is health card. Now, we've got national health over here, so we're not too worried about that. But those countries that don't have national health, they have to rely on private healthcare. Now, most people can't. And the moment somebody falls ill, usually they go broke. So what he has introduced is a health card that gives $5,000 worth of free healthcare to every family. Now, half of the Pakistan, I think, has been able to get the card because in the 3 years he's trying to manage to spread it to the whole country. But that has been an enormous success. And also, he's opened up tax shelters, which meant that poor people lying on the streets and so on, they can be given food and given a bed. So very, very sort of. So what's next for Pakistan? There are two ways. If the vote of Sunday goes with the government and with all the powers that be, then Pakistan is finished as a country, as a nuclear power. Kashmir problem disappears. Afghanistan will become part of Pakistan or whatever, vice versa. So identity of Pakistan will disappear. So you can see what is at stake here. And in order to prevent Imran Khan becoming powerful or into power again, they have done everything in terms of legally, but illegally they've plotted as well. And plots have been sort of unearthed where he says in one of his rallies, he said, if I die, I've made a video of all the people I know who are involved in this to conspire to kill me. And you will have to hold them accountable. Now that I think has put everyone, those people off from really carrying it out. But nevertheless, that threat is very real. So now, in this election, which is the final thing that I'm going to say, he has given the narrative of conspiracy and the incompetence of the government and how successful his tenure was in Pakistan's history and how the whole thing was completely, on a sustainable path to further development. If that was stopped and this government comes in, then the future is going to go for Pakistan. So what we have now at this election is a survey that tells you what the feeling of the public is. And 60% of the public all over the country is for him. So on one side, you've got Imran Khan with the public behind him. And here you've got the government, all the institutions, and the corruption on this side. So that was the battle that was being fought in those 20 seats yesterday, which are called by-elections of the renegade MPs. Because if Imran Khan wins majority of those, then he has majority in forming the Punjab government, which is the biggest province in Pakistan. And if he wins, then the central government will not have any province under its control, except for Islamabad, which means that it could be toppled or new elections could be called. And if new elections be called with the backing that public has given Imran Khan, Pakistan's future is going to be totally different. So what has happened yesterday? Important. He got 15 of the 20 seats, which meant that he can now oust the chief minister of Punjab, which is the largest province, bring in his government. His government is there already in one of the tribal areas and in the Balochistan area. So, and the current government does not have any province under its control, which means no power. So they'll have to call election. So that's where we are at the moment. And I was praying every day for the well-being of Imran Khan, because in that rough neighborhood, anything can happen. No, even now, you can't discount that. But the very fact that he is now showing success and people are responding means that Pakistan has a hope in the future. And I, for one, am very pleased about it. And I think everybody is signed a sigh of relief for the moment.
So can I just question the second thing you said there? I don't quite understand that second statement. The left with provincial power, no provincial, nothing.
No provincial anywhere in the country, no. That's right.
So what should it say? Because it says central government left with provincial power anywhere in the country. I don't understand that statement.
Well, central government, that's the government at the center. If you consider there are 5 provinces in Pakistan, and each has their own legislative assembly and their own governor and their own sort of chief minister.
Yeah.
And they are able to run their own affairs.
Yeah.
The center is in charge of defense and distribution of finances and so on. So what happens is that if these powers, these provinces are not under your control.
So is the word no missing from that statement? No.
Central government left with, no provincial power.
No provincial power. That's what
Absolutely right.
So
Absolutely right.
The Constitution is very much that the provinces are responsible for very large amounts of
They have a lot of power. See, at the moment,
power.
these corrupt governments, when they were in power, they made amendments to the Constitution which enable the provinces to have more power than the center. With the result that when they got the money from the center, they sort of siphoned off more than half of it into their own pockets, and then sort of, gave it to the cronies for the rest. So that amendment is what Imran Khan is going to also, once he comes back into power, he will go and remove that amendment. He will, in fact, bring back the cases of these people. Change, because they changed laws in the accountability department, which allows them to loot money, and so long as it's not in your name, if it's in your son's name, you can't be held responsible. That type of amendment means that nobody can touch you. This applies to the judges. Even today, the judges, you can't question as to how they got their wealth. That's against the law. So you can see the amount of power that has corrupted, these institutions is immense. And Imran Khan is the only hope. And I'm so pleased that he won this election. Okay, time for a little discussion.
Do you think you will get US backing or you will get US backing?
Sorry?
Will you get US backing or not?
US backing? Well, US has made a big error. You see, they are now recognizing that the local people are not with the US. The local people are with Imran Khan. and they are now in a lurch. So they'll have to make some amendments with Imran Khan and start a dialogue with him.
So I'm trying to understand a few things you've been saying.
Sorry?
No, sorry, can I just ask? Because you say, for instance, that the courts are corrupt, and yet the courts somehow led to these elections, which presumably they were because the people had accepted bribes or something. Is that right? Is that why the election?
No, you
Some
see-
parts of courts aren't corrupt.
See, the local facilitators are the chief of the army. He calls the shots ultimately. And the very fact that the conspiracy letter was not opened even by the Supreme Court was under the instructions of the chief of the army. But in small little matters, they do make a little judgment, hoping that further down there'll be enough mischief making to sort of achieve their end. So it's not a very straightforward, clean-cut case, because they come and make certain sort of judgments which are above board, but not all. But not all. So now, because in this yesterday's election, the army decided to be neutral, which meant that after vote was cast, that they would not disappear, the boxes and so on and so forth, which used to happen before. See? So now, because Imran Khan has won, everybody's saying, okay, fine. Ultimately, we've got an army which has stayed neutral as it said it was going to. And that has given the country a chance. And that's where we are headed at the moment. Hopefully. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear you comparing Pakistan with India, but both of them have remained neutral, I think, as far as Russia is concerned, haven't they? It's just India have that much more power being India than Pakistan. Okay. And India, while it has had, shall I say, families like the Nehru's descendants who have been very influential in Indian politics, their influence has been reduced. And the families are probably less powerful. I mean, I doesn't necessarily like all some of the other people stand for, but India has how shall I say, a more established democracy than Pakistan has. Pakistan has forever been having the army coming in and taking over, hasn't it? I mean,
That's right.
It's always been unstable.
Yeah. But a new element that has come in favor of India, as far as USA is concerned, is the emergence of China.
Yeah.
They want somebody to sort of stand up against China.
Yeah.
And India is the only answer for that. And especially with Pakistan being close to China,
Yeah.
and also not friendly with India. So that makes, this thing about Pakistan, China, Russia, a much more toxic type of association.
I believe India, I'm hearing somewhere, is about very soon to become the country with the highest population.
Highest population.
There's low birth rate in China, and India's population is still expanding.
Yeah, that's true. We'll have to see now, because the moment you see in India, the demographics are such that you have in the south more women, and in the north less women, because there's a lot of abortions, because they can find out who the girl child is, and they remove that through abortion. So there's a shortage of women in the north. So they come to the south, and the girls from the south are in demand for marriages in the north. So you got all these types of things happening as well.
Of course, I mean, India, of course, is a country with enormous diversity of wealth. I mean, there are very, very many very poor people there. But on contrast, you've got somebody like the wife of the man who might be our next prime minister here, who is mega rich. And it's obviously there's instabilities related to that.
Yeah, I saw the debate yesterday.
So, yeah.
I saw the debate yesterday. Let's see. Any others?
Can I ask a question? Hello, can you hear me?
Before closing Zoom, please tell people on Zoom that tomorrow's talk at 10:30 at the town hall has been cancelled. Do you all hear? No talk tomorrow, no 10:31. Robert Gull's talk at 12 o'clock will go ahead. So the other talk at 12 will go ahead. Okay, just to repeat, no talk at 10:30 tomorrow, but the talk on 12 o'clock is on. Okay, bye. Okay, Sue, anybody else? Yeah. Well, I am so pleased about the result of election yesterday. I'm going to celebrate.
No, it's good.
It is a-
whether it can be fair elections in the country.
Yeah.
There must be
Yeah.
a move in the right
Yeah.
direction.
And it's going to be so important because it's going to be important in terms of the whole world as well, because an unstable Pakistan would have really burnt out all that, and this Asia, Central Asia.
Can I just ask one thing about this election? Have there been any outside non-Pakistani observers?
At the elections,
No.
I mean, when you see the people, the press has been beaten up.
Yeah.
One claims that he's poisoned as well. And videos of these people being beaten up have emerged. You know, and this is all part of this corrupt setup that we've got.
Because I'm aware that in a lot of countries, sometimes more and sometimes less successfully, there have been international observers at elections.
Yeah.
And sometimes that has worked quite well.
I mean,
Not
this is-
always.
You know, this is so openly done.
Yeah.
Everybody knows about it. You know, the voter lists being changed, one family distributed miles away, while somebody else somewhere else. So, you know, and the election commission is complicit in this. That's why they do it. So that's why Imran Khan is so important. Okay, folks, go and celebrate as well.
Can I ask
Take
a
care.
question? Too
Bye.
late. Okay.